it can be.
Okay, now we're going to go into part 2 of Snow White and her celestial origins. And if you haven't seen part 1, you can go to the very end of this and should be in the top right hand corner, or you can just go to the channel and look for it and it'll take you to part 1 and then you can watch it through like was expected. So looking at this depiction here that's been given, we've noticed a few things. Here we have the eclipse, or we have that black hole sun situation going on we've talked about a few times. The depiction on the right, though, it's said to be in the thing, Mary. So I guess you could see that, right? Well, maybe she's not wearing enough clothes here. So if you saw her with a shawl on and everything around, wrapped around, and carrying a baby Jesus, there'd be a Mary. You could see Isis also, probably, if you just gave her Egyptian eye makeup and put some wings on her. Probably more importantly, you could see Persephone or Aphrodite coming out of her shell, or coming out of the waters that she came out of, the sea foam that was from the castration, actually, of one of the Titans of old. And this strangely all has a blend to each other. So whenever I tell you that there are connections to ancient folklore that go way back, and then whenever you find out the way back, it goes way back farther than that. Well, I got a couple of books where it was supposedly about this, and they bring up this German folklore about Snow White and this lady that had some kid that was encephalitic and then went into a coma, and they put her into a hospital, and she wrote her off for dead, and pretty much, and then there was, she had no idea, but she had come back too, and had this doctor that had worked with her and fell in love with him or whatever, and then he was going to get married to her, and she was invited to the wedding and didn't know that it was her, and showed up and actually didn't recognize her own daughter. And situations like this that it all comes out of. But in the heart of the story, there's a few things to talk about. There is the magic mirror. In tales like this, whenever it puts the magic in it, sometimes it's a vehicle to make something happen that couldn't happen before in any way. And in other ways, it's the vehicle that is the directive. And you can quite often see it when you have a genie in a bottle and then he gives you 3 wishes. I mean, come on. So when we look at things like that, there's an esotericness to it, and quite often some of these things will run to a dead end. But I'm telling you, this is one of the many situations that actually read back to way before recorded time, and a tale as old as time, just like the song says. So let's look into this. Is this Mary? Well, they say Mary Magdalene. Oh snap. And a moon goddess. And again, this is part 2. So the fairy tale of Snow White was written by the brothers Grimm during the mid-19th century, and like all of their other fables, it was written as a parable, and therefore infused with layers of hidden meanings, and were ancient parable codes used to convey secret messages. What does the tale of Snow White communicate to inner circles of disciples and trusted followers? Guest author Ralph Ellis reveals the hidden cipher of the tale, and he's written quite a few books now of things that he's found. I found him out because he was looking into the shawl of Shroud of Turin, and I could go into that now, but nah, we're going to stay off on here. For what we were just recently looking at is the fact that there's supposed to be this huntsman that takes this girl away, right? And then what he does in turn is he passes her off. Now, in some stories, he passes her off to an old lady and an old man. And then it becomes a totally different story. And it's not even the story of Snow White. in folklore. But there's versions of it to where she somehow ended up with these 7 dwarfs. And so you wonder about these dwarves and hobbits and pixies and things like that. And the people that were mining people got this ideal of living in mountains and living in caves and doing mining and things like that. And so all these stories come out of that. And whistle while you work, and they've got little pointy hats on and all these, diddle doo doo doo, and each one has its own little quirks about it, doesn't it? And that's even strange too. It's probably not even something I could go into with the sneezy, snopey, dopey situation. And Doc, just out of nowhere, huh? So one key thing, though, that we're only going to touch upon just a little bit here in a minute, so I want to hit it first, is this mirror. Now, we talked about it before in the last part, and in essence, he's showing you that they believe the mirror that was as above, so below would have been the Mediterranean, and that was the mirror that the goddess was able to look upon and see who is going to be the most fair. But as above, so below, and so often it can be a good thing or a bad thing. There are omens, all kinds of things, right? Well, pardon me, let me get a drink. So, mirrors. Now, we find mirrors go back way back, but people could just actually get a puddle of water, a bowl of water, and then stare into a bowl of water with a reflection, and you got to see what you look like. You could look over in a calm stream and tell what you look like, pretty much, right? And you've seen that in depictions of Disney stuff type things too. But whenever a woman, let's see if I can do this gracefully. No, I can't. Okay, so when a woman gets older, she becomes somewhat jealous of young, beautiful women. And in reality, she's quite jealous of beautiful women all the time. And it gets a little worse when she gets older. And then she's able to just let it go. Right? But there's a time when a woman isn't going to, is losing her looks, and whenever her daughter is coming of age and gaining her looks, in some weird way, there can be some envy going on there. And just like the mother never knew, there was envy growing all the way up on her wanting to be like her mother. So it's harsh the way one would look at another and everything, and one's a loving reach and the other one's a kind of an envy in some situations. Wicked stepmother. See, because it can't be the mother in the story here. They've twisted it to the wicked stepmother. That's the motif we always go with, right? Because this couldn't have been your mother that freaked out on somebody. Shouldn't have been. And so whenever somebody looks at their own reflection and sees their age coming and sees their daughter coming of age, and they envy that moment whenever they used to be younger. It's the same thing with guys and getting 40 years old and wanting to buy a motorcycle or a Corvette or some crap to pull that fountain of youth that I just did a video about. And have that situation. Nowadays they say, oh, you just take a blue pill and everything. Well, that's not necessarily it. Yeah, it kind of is, but it kind of ain't. And doing a line of coke and a blue pill is not really it either, though you might feel that way. So back to the story, though. The mirror, who is the fairest of them all, and her name is Snow White. So this dictates that this has something to do with paleness, perhaps, Snow White and all these type of things. And people have said, well, whenever she took the poison, she turned pale and went into a coma. And if you keep somebody inside for year after year, like that German girl or Bavarian, wherever it was, you'll have there be quite pale too. And perhaps she's suffering from anemia or something along that line too. And that's the whole problem. And people just didn't know it back then or have any type of cure. But this guy somehow was feeding her something that had extra iron in it and brought her out of it after years of being in a coma. Who knows? It's magic, right? It's love. It's love's first kiss that brought her out, and whatever, right? Well, let's go back to a time way before this 1600s Bavarian situation, because we're talking about people looking in the sky as astronomers back thousands and thousands of years ago, and when this story was already old to them, and it was already a tale as old as time to them. And we were looking at the huntsman, and how what really we're looking at here is behind him is a horse or a unicorn, or in some tales of the Bible, a donkey, and people in an area that didn't have horses until a certain point, whenever people met people. And in front of him we have a bull, and he is Orion the hunter, but Orion the hunter is Hercules. He's Samson. He's going through his 12 labors, does the same situation. What's this 12? Well, it's zodiacal calendar thing. We'll get into that. But it's also hooked up with Gilgamesh and his ancient tale. And I kind of brushed on it at the very end of the last one and looking at the 45-minute barrier, and I freaked. But Gilgamesh, when he goes on this great trek with his friend Enkidu, who dies, and he realizes mortality, takes a trip to the edge of the earth to find Utnapishtim, who's been Noah, actually, who was granted immortal life because of him saving everything whenever the gods had made a wrong choice and killing everybody. Who's, not going to go there. And so he ends up in their trek, though, if you'll look, he goes up into a sacred forest and off the stream that everybody says, okay, that's the Tigris and Euphrates, and he does this, that, and the other, and everything. Yeah, but the twinkling of stars on the stream at night, and da-da-da, they talk about, and that's the cosmos, and he actually went through this thing, and they fight a bull, Humbaba, and they kill him off, and that's Taurus. And so you find Mithra has this ideal of killing Taurus and leading to the time of Aries, and it's all just been twisted into that story. So it's a tale much older than that, and then it's been retold again, and it's supposed to be the oldest tale, the first tale ever. And already in its inception, people that can pick it apart looked at it and go, well, this comes from some essence tale, and they've added things to it. And it looks like it's this weird iconography here, because it just doesn't quite fit, but it kind of fits, but and so maybe that's it. So Orion Hercules, this great huntsman, took pity upon the young girl, and radiant Snow White, Selene, the moon, and rather than killing her, and allowed her to go to a small house in the forest, which was home to 7 dwarves. And so the cosmic foundations of the continuing story are quite plain to see. The 7 small companions of Selene, the Snow White moon, are 7 planets that trail along behind Selene moon as they appear to orbit the earth. So the 7 dwarfs are the 7 known planets of that era. And whenever I was going to do this with a part showing my D&D thing, and all I'd really have to do is pray, and also I'd have to go up and tab over and show you who my deity is. I've got 19 players and everything into that, but quite a few of them, and all my elfin characters, their player was Selene, their deity, and praise to that. And what's weird is it shows an oak leaf, but it's a moon goddess that we go in, and she has to do with the summer festivals and all these things. Comes alive in spring, and has all these things to do with her. And so just her folklore alone leads into the same idea. But you'd have to say, okay, well, so they have the seven known planets of that era actually contain the moon. And it contains the moon and the sun and the five known planets. So it'd have to be leaving out the moon, and the earth is one of those. Guess which one he is? Is he dopey? Is he sneezy? Is he Doc? So, if the great forest was the cosmos for Gilgamesh, then this house in the forest must be the one of the 12 houses of the zodiac constellations. And if the seven dwarf planets were all in one zodiacal house, then this represents a rare conjunction of Selene moon and all the planets within a small quadrant of the heavens. And since Venus Aphrodite was one of the seven dwarf planets, then this rare conjunction with the moon must have taken place in the morning or in the evening, as we talked about how it bobs up and down, and actually over time in an 8-year cycle makes a perfect pentagram. Because Venus is the morning or evening star, and Lucifer, if you will. And if Selene moon had joined the planets in a dawn or dusk conjunction, then the Snow White goddess must have been waning, as she always does when she approaches Helios, the sun. Right? And this guy is your Adonis character, is going to save everything. Just like the sun always does, for even he is going to die on December 21st, and then 3 days later he will start to rise again on December 25th to save all of mankind. The sun falls 1 degree per day from the longest day of the year through the fall, and 1 degree around a ball in circumference. That's where we get 360 degrees, 60 minutes, and 60 seconds in a minute, 12 hours in a day, and everything. It comes from these Sumerians that had locked on time and astronomy, the ancient Chaldeans, if you will. And this is exactly what the fairy tale of Snow White says. The evil queen, Nut, the Milky Way, looked into her Mediterranean mirror and saw that Snow White, Selene, was still alive. The great huntsman, Orion Hercules, had deceived her. So Nut, dressed as a peddler, and sold Selene a beautiful lace corset, which she did up so tightly that Snow White, Selene, grew pale and fainted. And this is exactly what happens in the heavens above when Selene the moon approaches a conjunction with Venus and the other 6 planets in this particular case. By the very nature of the planetary orbits, that she is waning, and her waist is getting thinner and thinner as each day passes. It is almost as if someone is tightening a corset around her waist until Snow White Selene becomes just as thin as a sliver of her former self. And then she comes back to full, but this is called a new moon, not a wane. So they have a waxing and a waning, and then the new moon. And when she becomes full, she is pregnant again, but only after she kisses the sun. Right? So all of this conjunction, and some guy's gone back to astrology, whatever, and says that this either happened, it close to happened just a few years ago, but it wasn't all the planets. It was like 3 of them or something. But all we need is a couple more, and then the sun to come around and eclipse to happen. And they figured that it happened like 38,000 years ago. And so I'm not trying to tell you this story is 38,000 years old, but if it was really based off of this stuff that Ellis is trying to tell you that it is, the time when this would point to is that. And this is an embellished story, so it might have been a kind of story who's not about princesses tower and all kinds of things, but about girls and women and things and da 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 in a time way back when. Could go back tens of thousands of years quite easily. When the seven dwarf planets returned from their labors and saw Snow White Selene so thin and faint they thought she was dead, and within a few more days she did indeed die, turning from her usual brilliant snow-white radiance into a black and lifeless husk. Or perhaps it was a blood moon or a harvest moon, so she became jaundiced. The Snow White princess goddess was dead, and a great sorrow fell upon the seven dwarf planets, who adored her and followed her in a long line in the night sky. But the evil nut Milky Way was jubilant because with Selene Moon now black and lifeless, she was once again the most radiant goddess in the heavens above, and her Mediterranean mirror confirmed this because everywhere she looked in her great watery mirror, the only reflection she could see was herself. And so we're back at the point where there isn't a moon, and then comes a sliver and a new moon forms again. And so isn't this a cycle that keeps happening over and over again? Well, they're saying this hooks up to Egyptian things and thoughts that are running here at the same time of ideas, and they run it through, and it's kind of a counterpart to you, if you will, about Ra and Horus and going through, and then Set, and he has to kill Apep the snake, who's going to try to swallow the sun, which is an eclipse event type thing, and do that. Well, what happens if it's an eclipse event? Or something like this. Well, yeah, but this is some weird story. Yeah, it's all a bunch of weird stories, and I turned into a cow and had sex with her, or a bird, and things. These people, there's a lot of animism going on, and they're giving you aspects and ideas of things, and it just, so you might get an idea of what they're talking about, but then there's a whole layer to the whole concept if you step out of it third person. And then sometimes if you look at the whole tale in general, it wouldn't be the same Aesop's fable anymore. And let me tell you, girls and boys are going to be looking at this totally different than each other. For a girl, may have felt like she slept her life away until she found this one guy. It's one way of looking at it. But guys are also looking for this untouched girl that is perhaps slept her life away, and somehow he meets her, and just by his kiss alone she becomes enamored. But there's another story, for we always have that Dungeons and Dragons thing where it's beset by a dragon, and if he kills the dragon or does the thing, then he gets the girl. Right? Well, what's weird is what you end up doing whenever you tell the rest of the story with it and go with the Zodiac, supposedly. You come all the way around, and then the guy that saves her is the same dude again. Yeah, so it's Orion the Hunter that saves her. But that's Prince Charming now. It's a new guy. Because the other guy was an old huntsman, right? So here's seven dwarves goes trudging along. The death of the moon. Despite the gloom that now pervaded the heavens, help was at hand, because a planetary conjunction involving Venus and Selene Moon was to be at dawn or dusk, and so Selene Moon was a new moon at this time. She was a dark and lifeless, as if entombed in a crystal casket and lost from this world. And the crystal casket, what's weird about that is that they again talk about how that goes with this German thing that I was telling you about before, because they had to do with glass and all this type of stuff, and they try to say, oh, so it has to do with that. Well, there's other people have said, no, that just re-enlivened the story, for there are versions before. Here's the earliest one, and it's just 200 years, it's 1400s. And it's like, no, now that comes back from these Proto-Indo-Europeans who had this thing going on. Well, how late does this go back? Well, no, they've got this thing in Egypt, which kind of mimics it or whatever in the idealism of it all. And so if you want to say the inspiration of, not that we're directly going exactly with it, because the story changes over time. It's a tale as old as time, and the song remains the same, and it's the never-ending story. But the never-ending story has chapters that keep folding and folding and folding through time. And not just one person's life, or an era, or an age, or perhaps a zodiacal great age. And so it talked about crystal caskets, but I forgot the Egypt thing. So if you look at these caskets they've got of Egypt, they're all adorned with gold, but then they're all inlaid with crystal and gem glass, faience, and glass. So there's a glass casket, and like a Russian doll, it's a one inside another inside another. It's just another facet of it. But a dawn or dusk conjunction must be adjacent to Helios, the sun, the prince or king of the heavens. And when that handsome prince Helios looked down upon the dark and lifeless Selene moon, he thought she was the most beautiful princess in the heavens. And so as Helios' son approached Selene moon, he kissed her lifeless body, and then, being conveniently the exact same apparent size as they are, they formed a cosmic diamond marriage ring in the heavens above as they consummated their love for one another. Two celestial bodies merging in flagrante delicto, a marriage made in heaven, as above, so below. And so, I thought they had a picture of it. Oh, they do. So here is this idea where Helios the sun is kissing the moon, and then they get together, but facing away from us because we're R-rated on this channel. And da-da, and one ring to rule them all, right there. Following the celestial marriage, Snow White Selene moon gradually came back to life. Her corset was slackened, her image began to swell again, and the newly pregnant Snow White Selene once more became the most radiant princess goddess in the night sky. Now, this also has to do with the fact that in a girl's life, during her winter time, quite often there ain't much to do. And before cable TV, women got pregnant leading through that time. In fact, the whole idea of Thanksgiving and these things is try to make it happen so you can have a child coming out of spring. So coming into spring, you would be pregnant and radiant as the moon, and you would have that thing. And so harvest moon set this one on this side, which we call harvest moon, and on the other end you have the sacred moon that hooks up with the sun calendar to herald Easter. And that's just the time when the amount of sun, which was less than the darkness of the day, becomes more than. There's more daylight, daylight savings time kicks in after that, but there starts to be more and more hours per day. The sun is up longer, and all the way through summer, and then retards back 1 degree per day, and we go again into the same situation. And so when the Milky Way looked down upon her Mediterranean mirror once again. She was aghast now to see Snow White Selene alive and radiant once more. So Snow White shone in all her radiant glory, while Nut could only manage a ghostly glimmer in comparison. All the scheming and plotting had been for nothing, because the celestial royal couple, Helios and Selene, reigned supreme once more. Yep, it's not going to go away. And I could go off on that, really. Let's just let that go and see if I can pull it back together at the end of this. Mary Magdalene, the moon goddess. Are you ready for this? This was the celestial story that the Brothers Grimm wished to convey. The fairy tale of Snow White was actually a story of a cosmic wedding between the sun and the moon, and the reason why this story was deemed to be heretical was that it also told the story of the biblical royal family. Yeah, it's so whenever I was doing the ones a couple years ago about people kept asking me what do I think about Brown and the whole Da Vinci Code and all that type of stuff, and I go, he was on the right track, but then he makes a bunch of connections and this, that, and the other, and I could never put it together that much. I can get to the Knights Templar, but I can't go from there. And actually, he's put a couple of weird things together and ended up in the same place that I did, and that's strange in itself. It almost seemed like he was lacking at one point, but went with it, and ta-da, close my eyes and throw a dart, and I hit 20. But I feel like I've done that quite often. But it was seen to be heretical because of that, because it said that Mary Magdalene had gotten with Jesus, because we know Jesus was a sun god, as I just talked about on December 21st, 25th, and the things that went along with that, and came to be the Savior of all mankind again. For this has happened a bunch of times to different people. There hasn't been one in 2,000 years, though, and everybody's in a duh. Like, this is why the son and daughter of the Queen Cleopatra of Egypt were named Helios and Selene. Oh, snap ding. The sun and the moon, as above, so below. And since the biblical royal family were descended from Queen Cleopatra, as explained in Cleopatra to Christ, one of his books, later Renaissance artists closely identified both Mary the Virgin and Mary Magdalene with Selene the moon, standing upon the moon and wearing a halo of those stars, usually 7 of them. People said, well, that's the Pleiades and this, that's, and the other, and everything, and go, yeah. That's also the 7 dwarfs, because that's where that came from. Not directly, but indirectly through the telephone game a couple of thousand years. That's where that came from. And so the biblical royal family were descended from Queen Cleopatra, and she also had a child which gave her a virgin birth with cesarean section, right? In fact, that's what the Caesar's child was, cesarean. That's why they call it a C-section today. Some of this stuff's right in your face. So let's look at a depiction of this. For now, what we see is she's wearing red, white, and blue. But that's strange. Well, what's else strange about it? She has some lily flowers here going on, and the cherubs are all around her. She's standing on the moon, got a halo of stars. That's 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Or is it 13 symbolically? Oh no. And how old was this painting? And it's got a circle of 13 stars. And she's wearing red, white, and blue. How I got ding. So the moon, huh? Mary is the goddess Selene, with the moon beneath her feet and the 12 stars of the constellation around her head. The image is from the Mary Magdalene Church in Gornjigrad, Slovenia, which indicates the famous imagery from Revelations 12:1. Can refer to Mary Magdalene as much as Mary the Virgin, although this Mary wears the blue and white robes of the Mary the Virgin. rather than the green and gold of Mary Magdalene, which is also telling, if that's so, the church is dedicated to Mary Magdalena. And the Mary Magdalene is a whole thing into itself, where Magdala is meant to be in a tower, and people have said this Odessa area had these towers in it and people and everything, and there was this king of Odessa, and he was supposed to give away his virgin daughter or something, and this whole thing went wrong, like leading into the Jewish revolt because of BS going on. And so is that the whole idea, and is that her that shows up in this story? How does this all work out? Well, it looks like it worked out where she ended up going into Rome and stuff with some people and getting with who you would think is the second coming of Christ at Titus. Yeah, if you look back at, Marcellus, all these Roman people were all getting with Cleopatra, she was a whore and all this. It's like people, like if she met him and da 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 and everything, and one thing led to another, whatever. But if all we know is three things about him, and that's the one when she's rolled up in a carpet and da da da, which could be a fanciful story in the first place, then you end up coming up with these ideas of harlots and stuff. And of course, Mary Magdalene was supposed to have been some type of harlot, but all of a sudden just turned whenever she met Jesus and washed his feet and did all these things and stuff. But then there's gospels of her that says that she was his closest companion, and he used to kiss her on the, it never finishes it there, her lacuna, meaning a piece missing. But yeah, that's a pretty important piece. Said he loved her more than the other devotees, and he would kiss her on the so back then it wasn't necessarily so bad, and still to this day for a rabbi or somebody to keep themselves chaste. But then Jesus was supposed to have been chaste, for he's a Nazarite, and they keep their hair long until they get with somebody, then they cut it short. This is the story of Samson and losing his hair, and Delilah, and the whole thing. This sacred hair and a lock of hair that they keep long, and things that they do up until this bar mitzvah type time, if you will. Both of the biblical Marys were icons of Snow White, sacred royals who were venerated as incarnations of Isis Selene, the Snow White celestial goddess, while Jesus was seen as an incarnation of Helios, the sun god, Sol Invictus, Mithras, and so many others. Tammuz of your Bible, Dumuzi of the Sumerians, and that would make Nut over the Ninharsag of the original tale, and Semiramis and the coming before that. But then that's a retelling in a tale as old as time. This assertion is confirmed by the imagery on the Lady Mary Zodiac at Bel El Shian, a 6th century monastery just south of the Sea of Galilee, which has to do with Gauls, like Galatians has to do with Gauls. Here we see that we can only be Jesus and Mary surrounded by 12 disciple constellations of the zodiac, and who are depicted here as calendrical months of the year, but layout of Bet El Shan mosaic is clearly astrological and is almost exactly the same as Hamat Teveria's zodiac, which lies a few kilometers to the north at Tiberias. And that's what the Sea of Galilee used to be called too. It was Lake Tiberias. It wasn't even a sea. There's no reason for it to have been a sea. So here we're starting to see this zodiac that's here, and you can see Jesus and somebody else is Mary, and one's a sun god and one's the moon, and the 12 disciples all around him, denoting months of the year. And I've shown this in about 4 different other versions of this in videos going back 4 or 5 years now, in variations on a theme of how this all hooks up together with zodiacs and celestial events, and even a lot of the stories hook up along the same lines. And if you look at their scepters that they have, His is fire, and hers is ice. Oddly, whenever I found this out, I had it rolling around in my mind coming into Christmas one year, and all of a sudden that Christmas claymation animation, dum 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 dum. I'm Mr. Heat Miser. I'm Mr. Steam. That crap, and then one's fire and one's ice, and this, that, and the other, and you've got to bring the summer, and it's got to snow, and all these type of things, and it made me think of these people, thinking through these thoughts. It's like that's what people thought that it was like, that, Jack Frost and this whole idea of what can go on, and you've seen Jack Frost and this Santa Claus here recently. Jesus and Mary here are portrayed as Helios sun and Selene moon in a cosmic conjunction and impending eclipse. Snow White, Mary, and her Prince Charming Jesus are consummating their love for each other, as above so below. I don't see any sex going on, but they marked out that part. But here we have all the disciples named out of them, and even months too. October would be this month here. That's weird. Yeah, already marked out. So here we see a tale as old as time for the declamation of one of these zodiacs changing its little degrees, like what's shown right around the rim here in a cogwheel looking like a gear. Knock knock ding. Takes a little over 2,000 years, and they're talking about how it was heralding Taurus, but you can see bull worship all going on at the earliest times, and it had to have had a story that went on before that that went with ideas. That's when we had cattle. For I bet you before that it was idealizing other creatures for different people in different places, somewhat, but it was somewhat all the same, and that's the way people came out of it with the same stories, was that they were heralded by some people that went around that had these stories, and it continued from there. So how far does this go back, man? Well, I can't tell you really how far it goes back. I can tell you that it seems like from research it goes back into the Ice Age, because this concept is looked at as being a long calendar, short calendar, and they're saying, well, short calendar is spring and summer, and this is the idea, and then Nana dies as the moon, and then she comes back for spring, and this is the same thing of Diana and Venus and all this ideas they have coming back, where they herald the spring on a feminine form as opposed to Jesus doing it. See, whenever it's just all in one God, even though it's three, with a bunch of saints and angels, so there's all the whole workup. But anyhow, since it's this group here that you can utilize in the same ways, that you end up with a, kind of forgot where I was going, guys, you end up with a long drawn out form of the same situation, and 12 is symbolic seasons, the four corners. When were the four corners these four corners? When were they those? How does this lead to do with Snow White? Oh yeah, it has to do with this spring and summer, so this winter, so this ice. But then the firmament above and below was the ice encroached upon us and then melted away rapidly at the Younger Dryas event. And so this ice of a long winter, not the short winter they talk about, but the long winter, is all the way through a whole calendar event. And it may lead back to what that guy said some 38,000 years ago, well, before there was an alignment like all of those. Of course, in that same deal, he was trying to say that made